Dennis Ross. He's a former U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East and an NBC News Foreign Affairs analyst. Ambassador, thanks for being here. I want to go back to Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments, the idea that this war will continue for many more months. What should we expect that to look like as Israel is also pulling back troops from inside Gaza? Does that just mean an expanded bombing campaign, or what do you see happening in the next weeks and months here?
Well, I think it's an important question. I think what we saw today in terms of the Israelis announcing the withdrawal of 5 brigades is a function of beginning to transition into another phase in the war. Israelis had 4 divisions in Gaza. That's an awful lot of force in a very small area.
Put that in civilian math for us, Ambassador.
Well, you're talking about, maybe close to, I don't know, maybe 75 to 80,000 forces in Gaza, which is a huge number. So what you're seeing is a kind of withdrawal in terms of the size of that presence. Some of this is simply a function of, demobilizing some of the reserves. Israel does not have a large standing army, so you have lots of reserves. When you take the reserves, put them in the military, you're taking them out of the civilian day-to-day life and the civilian economy, number one. Number two, that size presence in a small area over a period of time becomes, in a sense, less productive from the standpoint of the military campaign. And one of the things that the Israeli military revealed today is that there have been 29 deaths of Israeli soldiers from friendly fire. Again, when you have a really large number there, that increases the prospects of that. So there are tactical, practical reasons to reduce the presence. But there's also, I think it's related to what the administration has been asking Israel to do, which is reduce the presence, make the nature of the campaign a more targeted one, specifically on the leadership, or specifically on pockets of Hamas resistance, or specifically on different parts of the military infrastructure. I think the Israelis are also looking at what can be a reduced size to carry out a campaign still against the military wherewithal of Hamas, as well as the tunnel system. The one thing that surprised the Israelis was not the existence of the tunnels. The one thing that surprised the Israelis was the depth of the tunnels, the scope of the tunnels, the development. I was in the tunnel that they uncovered just below the Erez crossing point. I have previously been in the tunnels in the past that Hezbollah created in the north. What I saw in the south was a tunnel that was much more elaborate than anything I'd seen from Hezbollah. What I saw was a tunnel big enough to drive a car in, with a pipe along the ceiling. I mean, this was a very well-developed tunnel. The scope of this infrastructure is so deep, so developed, that rooting it out is clearly what takes time. When you hear the Prime Minister talk about several months, what I've been hearing from the Israeli military is exactly that. But it's also a function of a different kind of campaign than you've seen so far. Less bombing, more targeted, more forays in and out.
To me, I feel like that's another thing to put a pin in for Israeli intelligence after the fact of why they were surprised by the tunnel depth at all, given kind of all the other questions about what happened on October 7th. I want to ask you about your op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. You talk about the limits of American influence over Israel, and you write in part that threatening to withhold U.S. aid unless Israel changes its policies would only have the effect of making the Israelis feel they must go it alone. You write in this op-ed about the idea that Biden's embrace of Israel and of Netanyahu's ability to run this war as he sees fit does give Biden more leverage. But how then can and should he use it to achieve these goals that the Americans have about how this war be executed?
Look, I think there's 2 dimensions to how to use that influence. And it's real, because Biden has built a very high degree of credit in Israel. I've been in Israel the last couple of weeks. One of the things I've been struck by is how deeply the Biden position is embraced here. Now, it raises the cost to the Prime Minister of Israel to resist what he's suggesting. Already, I think we've succeeded in changing some of what the Israelis have done in terms of the scope of humanitarian assistance by the pressure on that. Many Israelis, I still hear it, say, look, as long as Hamas won't allow the Red Cross access to the hostages, continues to hold these hostages, all of whom were kidnapped, why should we be allowing any assistance into Gaza at all? there would not have been this readiness to provide this had it not been for the pressure from the president. Similarly, there's the whole question of what comes afterwards. What's the pathway? This is not just a question of the military tactics. It's also what comes afterwards in Gaza. The administration has been pressing the prime minister to lay out, okay, what is your day after strategy? How do you get from here to the day after strategy? That is something that, again, was being resisted. Today, for the first time, or tomorrow, actually, for the first time, the prime minister is authorizing a discussion of the day after strategy. So that it tells you there is effect from what the president is saying to the prime minister in private. And it also says that the more the president sort of outlines what we consider to be reasonable, he has a domestic audience here in Israel that is inclined to listen to him because they've seen him create a kind of political credit and credibility here, given his attitudes and his readiness to stand up to opposition from much of the rest of the world. So he gets a lot of credit here, and it's important for him, I think, to use that leverage and use it wisely.
Fascinating stuff. Ambassador Dennis Ross, we have to leave it there, but thank you for sharing your expertise with us here today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.